Born and raised in North Platte, member of St. Pat's here. Also began working at St. Pat's High School this year as a school counselor. Prior to that, I had a mental health private practice, as my mom mentioned, so just have a lot of experience working with other people through loss. This covers my own personal experiences with grief and loss. I just have to read it because if I try to say it out loud to you without reading it, I think I will probably fall apart, and hopefully I don't do that anyway. So, my dad's name was Randy Kramer, and he died on October 4th, 2016. This is a picture of he and I at my brother's wedding, which was just not even a year before he passed away. It's a pretty special picture for me. Oops. As I mentioned, my dad, Randy, died October 4th, 2016. He knew he was approaching death well before that, however. In June of 2016, he called me up and proceeded to have what turned out to be perhaps the most difficult conversation of my life. My dad told me that day that he believed he was almost ready to meet Jesus and that he was ready. He wanted me to try to work towards letting him go, as hard as this would be for me. Through tears, I tried to convince Dad that while I was grateful for his acceptance with this, we still had more treatments to try, more specialists to pursue, more ways to try to save his life. I just could not allow myself to imagine life on earth without my dad. Right before the conversation ended, my dad said these words to me: "Moriah, remember, I am always with you." At the time, I had never known a life without my dad, so I remember thinking, oh, okay, of course you're with me. However, a part of me knew that day that the words, "I am always with you," would soon take on a new meaning. Now, when I am missing him, or feeling sad that he isn't here to be part of our family's events, or just for me to call when I want to or need to, I just imagine hearing him say those words, "I am always with you." My dad was wise, so wise. I believe that he very intentionally chose those words to say to me that day, not just to comfort me at that point in time, as he was asking me to begin to let go of him, but also to carry those words with me throughout my life, so that no matter what, I can feel his presence with me in my heart. I feel my dad most in nature. As a farmer and rancher, he spent much of his time in the great outdoors, breathing the fresh air and loving the land and cattle that he cared for. I don't get to spend as much time outdoors, but when I do find myself there, he feels so close. I take a deep breath, close my eyes, remember his reassuring smile, and imagine his soft voice saying, "I am always with you." We've heard a little bit already today about suffering, so I'll talk a little bit about my dad's suffering. In some ways, I consider myself very blessed that I was able to have that talk that day with my dad. You will hear from people later today that did not have the opportunity to say goodbye or to have time to really absorb what was happening surrounding the death of their loved one. My heart aches for them as I imagine how incredibly painful a sudden and unexpected loss must be. As much as I am thankful for the chance that I had to say goodbye to my dad and the ability to hear him say he was ready to go to heaven, this gift came at a price. My dad endured incredible suffering during the last several years of his life. He came very close to dying in 2012 when our daughter Elise, his first grandchild, was only a few months old. I often think back to that time, and maybe a little selfishly, how much we would have missed out on if he would have died in 2012. He was able to make many, many more memories with our family. He got to see several more grandchildren join our family, including our son Jace, who was only 2 when my dad passed away, but still today talks about his papa all the time. Since my dad's death, however, I have been able to see the other side of this. My dad didn't ever talk or complain much about his pain, but it was obvious to the rest of us. I believe God wanted this suffering for my dad, and that it was a sacrifice God chose for my dad to have. Who knows, other than God, why or for what purpose my dad went through the suffering he did. But I like to think that maybe in part, perhaps it was to give us the gift of a few more earthly years with our dad and Papa. I felt extreme guilt after my dad died that we put him through extra pain by taking him to the hospital in Lincoln for the last month of his life. Looking back, though, I believe this was all part of God's plan. God needed all parts of his plan to be complete. While Dad was in the hospital in Lincoln, we finally found out what was at the root of all his pain and suffering. He was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a rare type of cancer in the plasma of the blood. He fought hard following his diagnosis. However, the cancer was too progressed for the chemo and other treatments to do much good. His body was even rejecting the nutrition that the doctors were trying to give him through various types of tubes. On September 30th, 2016, my husband Josh and I went to visit my dad. He was still trying to fight, I'm sure mostly because we wanted him to. Remember, he was ready for God to take him back in June of that year. While visiting with him that day, I could tell he was rapidly losing energy. He was becoming more and more distant from us and from earthly things. I felt God nudging me to say something to him that day. I said, "Dad, let's take you home." He only replied with one word, "Alleluia." His eyes filled up with tears. And even though my heart was breaking, I knew it was the right thing to do. My dad wanted to die at home with my mom, who he always called his bride, and I needed to set things in motion to make sure that that happened. On October 2nd, 2016, my dad returned to his home on the hill that he shared with my mom and started hospice care. The ambulance crew was gracious enough to stop on the way home for him to have one last view of my brother Nathan harvesting. We have a beautiful video of that experience, and I'm so grateful that we do. On the way home that day, my brother Josh and I were planning some of the details for our dad's funeral. It was so surreal to be doing that, even though he was still alive. The doctors in Lincoln had indicated that we likely had 10 days to 2 weeks before my dad would pass away. My brother Josh said he didn't think my dad would live that long. He thought he would die in only 2 days, October 4th, since it was the feast day of our dad's favorite saint, St. Francis of Assisi. I was a little skeptical because of what the doctors had said, but I knew this would be up to God. We spent a lot of time with our dad over the next couple days. The morning of October 4th, I went up to spend a little more time with him. Mom and I sang him his favorite song, The Prayer of St. Francis. It was such an incredible moment for the three of us, and one that I will always remember. As I was leaving that morning, I saw my dad raise his hand up. This was odd, as he had very little energy at that point and had not made any kinds of motions like that for quite some time. I tried to hold his hand as he had it raised, but he gently pulled it away. I think maybe he was reaching towards heaven, or perhaps heaven was reaching for him. Shortly after I left, I got word that my dad had taken his last breath on earth. There were so many beautiful pieces of his passing. Our ability to say goodbye, hearing him say the words that he was courageously ready to move on to the next life with Jesus and all those that had passed before him, seeing the combine make one last round, his dying on the feast of St. Francis. Soon after, my mom and I could sing him The Prayer of St. Francis, his favorite song. Before the loss of my dad, we never thought about death being associated with beauty, but there certainly was incredible beauty surrounding the death of my dad. Thank you. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring your love. Where there is injury, your pardon, Lord. And where there's doubt, true faith in you. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there's despair in life, let me bring hope. Where there is darkness, only light. And where there's sadness, ever joy. O Master, grant that I may never seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love with all my soul. Make me a channel of your peace. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned, in giving of ourselves that we receive, and in dying that we're born to eternal